Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University. I'm Jeff Pearson, and this is my co-host,
Stephen White.
Hello, Stephen. How are you doing?
Pretty good, Jeff. So one of the articles that came out recently on the RentPrep blog is about landlord attitudes, and it's a topic that we touch on the podcast pretty often. Usually we're talking about it in context of landlords need to really treat their rental business as a business. And, I think this article dives a little bit deeper into basically, things that you can, landlords are always trying to work on their business or work on their properties. But one thing that kind of gets overlooked is your own attitude. And I think the reason why it's an important article for landlords is because a lot of landlord problems are self-inflicted problems,
Very true.
that landlords have. And I think that sometimes it definitely comes down to a landlord's attitude. And, some landlords are very good landlords and there are some very bad landlords. And I definitely think that in the rental space or the rental industry, bad landlords are one of those things where, one bad egg ruins the bunch type of a thing, where a lot of people have misconceptions or a bad impression of a landlord, and it's probably for good reason, because they had a bad experience with a bad landlord. So there's certainly good ones out there, and thankfully at RentPrep we deal with a lot of good landlords, but we sure cross paths with enough bad landlords. So I think that anytime that you have an opportunity to look at improving your business, and if that means improving yourself or improving your attitude or your outlook, that you should do that. You should always be looking to make improvements.
Yes. This is a really good and interesting article that Jennifer Mon wrote for the blog. Jennifer, if our listeners don't know, is our co-host for the In the News episodes here at Landlord University. And, she talked about a couple of things. She talked about the fact that attitude is a choice. And, when you think of being a landlord as a business, then you think of it in terms of customer service. And when you go to the store and you've got one of those checkers that is just so pleasant and fun to interact with, that's kind of the approach that you need to take as a landlord every time you interact with your tenants. And it even goes beyond your tenants, because you have service providers, people who are doing work on your property. All of those things set the tone for who you are as a landlord, as a business owner. And it's really important to be paying attention to that. And again, thinking of this as a business and thinking of yourself as working with customers.
Yeah. And, like we said in the beginning, that a lot of landlord problems are sort of self-induced problems. I think so many times, I've talked to a landlord who's just fired up about something or, one thing or another. And so many times I've thought, this is just a simple change in attitude. If you just looked at this differently, if you just look at this from a different perspective for a second, and I think that you'll see this differently, or your attitude may change. I think that this really applies to what I would consider, or in my mind, when I'm thinking about a lot of the landlords that are just sort of stubborn, set in their ways. They're kind of the same landlord that I would categorize that make it into our In the News segments a lot of times, that end up acting or reacting very emotionally and getting themselves into trouble.
Yes.
And, I think that that has a lot to do with just, their personality and their attitude towards things. So if they can find a way to stop doing that, and if they can find a way to look at things differently or with a different perspective, I think they're going to find themselves, A, lot happier, and B, avoiding a lot of the troubles that landlords find themselves getting into, because they start to go outside of the legal limits of the law when they start taking things too personally, or they start reacting too emotionally to things, which is not, it's a lot easier said than done. Anyone who's ever dealt with a bad tenant or dealt with a situation that you just feel completely out of control, it's a horrible feeling. I can't discount that. I can't say that I don't feel for them. And I've been in that situation myself, where you're so frustrated, and you could be 100% in the right. You know, classic case is an episode that we just covered in the news of a landlord that found out that a person had cats in their apartment. He had a no pet rule or policy. And, you know, instead of enforcing that policy and taking the proper procedures, he broke into the apartment and stole the cats and had them euthanized. You know, and I'm sure
Ridiculous.
yeah, it really is. And I'm sure his reasoning was, well, she's breaking her lease and this is my place and I can do what I want. And again, the wrong attitude to have. You know, we see landlords get themselves into trouble in these cases where they're just not handling it the right way. They're not looking at it as, well, regardless of if I'm right or wrong, I'm going to follow this thing through to the letter of the law and make sure that I'm doing everything that I am supposed to be doing legally and not stepping outside of those limits, because ultimately you're hurting yourself.
Yes. You know, like Restaurant Impossible and Hotel Impossible and things like that. And one of the common themes that they come across when you watch these is that the owners of these businesses have gotten so upside down that they're living in this state of unhappiness. And that permeates everything they do, all of their interactions with the people around them. And after these guys come in and help make a mental adjustment, you see a big change. Now, whether or not those changes last in the long term, who knows? But you
Yep.
can certainly see a change in the immediate, and you can see what a change in attitude will do to a business and a business owner and their family and the people around them. So it really is important to keep your attitude in check and pay attention to where you're at. And if it starts to seem like everybody is creating problems and everybody is a problem, the first thing to do is stop and look at yourself and say, wait a
Mhm.
minute, is it them or is it me?
Right.
How am I treating the people around me? How am I treating myself? And then see if you can make an adjustment with that. And I think most of the time we would find that that would make a huge difference in the way we feel and the way people feel about us.
Yeah. And you know what? I got a super interesting story here and a way to relate this. You know, before Jennifer became RentPrep's content manager and really our head content writer, we had somebody else that was writing a lot of blog articles for us, and it was a really interesting sort of experiment in behavior. This person was, I would just classify them as an angry person just in general, and that came through in their writing, and a lot of the topics that they covered and a lot of in the way that they wrote was just written in sort of a way that you would read it and say that just sounds like an angry person, you know. But what's interesting, so as we all know, or maybe some of the listeners may not know, anytime that you write a blog article or you write something and you post it on a website, that content becomes searchable, right?
Yes.
Well, what we were noticing is the type of people that was attracting were the type of people that that person was just like, because their search terms reflect how that article was written. And so it was so interesting to see, you know, I guess you can just say the number of unwanted clients that we had, because you start dealing with angry people and angry clients, and you're almost attracting those type of people just because that was, you get what you put out, and so that's what we were putting out, and so that's what we were getting in return. And so, one of the things I love about Jennifer in this article is proof right here that, she has a different writing style. I think that she's got a much more optimistic writing style anyway, and just a much more reasonable person, and that tends to attract more reasonable people and more reasonable landlords. And I think the same goes for landlords. You get back what you put out, and I think a lot of landlords create their own problems, and that's a perfect example. If they're almost dictating what type of tenants they're going to get by how they're presenting themselves. And it goes right back to what we're always talking about, is treating it like a business and being professional. And, the tenants are doing just as much screening on the landlord as the landlords are doing on them. And, a good tenant does not want a bad landlord. So, if you're a bad landlord, there's a good chance that you're going to attract bad tenants.
Very true. Well, great, Stephen. I think that wraps up another evening of night school. I look forward to talking with you tomorrow evening.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.